So I guess I should probably introduce myself first. I am Becky Leverette. I am the full-time psychology instructor here at Spoon River College. This college theme presentation is definitely within my wheelhouse, right? It's talking about a lot of psychology concepts, but because it was in my wheelhouse, I overthought it a lot. So hopefully what I'm gonna say to you is cogent and makes sense. So the title of my presentation is From Empathy to Kindness, Why Education Matters. And before we start, I just wanted to kind of give you a hypothetical question to kind of chew on as we're talking. And this is it. Have you ever assumed something about someone only to find out later that you were completely and utterly wrong? Yeah, so I can think of many instances in my life in which that happens. So hopefully we can answer the question to why that might have happened to you using some social psychology. Today, what we're going to be talking about is why empathy matters, how education shapes that, and then it can shape that into kind action and thoughtful action. All right, so what empathy is, I guess that's probably a good place to start, right? Defining our terms. So empathy, I like to think of as feeling with someone, okay? So this is different than sympathy, where we feel bad for someone, where we feel pity for someone. Here what we're trying to do is to put ourselves into their shoes and to feel what they're actually feeling, right? So that's the major distinction between those two concepts. Another way I like to think of it is perspective taking. So your ability to, again, kind of take the perspective of another human being, see the world, feel the world as they would. Now, what empathy does help us to do, right, is it helps us to connect to other human beings. It helps us to understand them, hopefully, and it helps us to also communicate in ways that make sense. And if it is sort of directed properly, what it can do is actually spark actions, right, that can benefit others. And that, of course, would be kindness, right, that we're leading into. All right, so let me move on to talk just a little bit about the origins of empathy, kind of from a psychological perspective. And I guess we're going to weave in some social psych as well here as we're talking about this. So in terms of where empathy comes from, it does appear that our brains are really kind of hardwired to experience empathy. And I'll talk about why that is using these two concepts that we have on the board. So first of all, we do know that there was an evolutionary advantage to us as early humans to feel empathy for others. It allowed us, right, to cooperate within small groups so that we lived long enough to survive and then reproduce and then pass that sort of predisposition on to the next generation. We also, this is a really cool discovery that was been made in neuroscience just within recent years, we also within our brains have what are called mirror neuron networks. And what these allow us to do is to look at other people and to mimic them. They activate in response to watching others, so it helps us to mimic their behavior. And ultimately what we believe is it also helps us to feel empathy. So to look at another person, help us to understand what it is that they're feeling as well. So these mirror neurons are really important in their relationship to our ability to empathize with others. So we have that, right, when we come into the world. That's there as a part of our brains. So it means it's probably pretty important for the human species to be able to empathize with others, okay? So that's kind of the biological piece of this, right? And of course we know that it's not all about biology. We have also social features of our environment that are going to act on that biology and interact with it to then shape what empathy sort of turns into. So in terms of the social factors that we have here, we have early learning that takes place through observing others within our lives. So we observe our parents, we observe older family members, we observe our teachers as well. One way we know to teach empathy to our students, one really powerful way, is by modeling that for them, right? Showing them what that looks like in an actual classroom setting. And so through those sort of imitation, learning through observation, that is going to allow us to kind of, act on that biology that's already there, right? To have that full experience of empathy. And to just add in the education piece of this, because that's what we're kind of focusing on, what education does is it amplifies that natural empathy that we have inside us by teaching us how to perspective take, okay? So that's gonna be something I talk more about kind of coming up. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about how we go from empathy to kindness before we get into why education matters. I'm a little dry, sorry about that. When I was talking to my intro students yesterday, I was introducing them to psychology and was telling them the fact that we as psychologists study internal experiences as well as observable behavior. Okay? So this was a good time for me to sort of put my intro psychology stuff into effect here, right? By applying it to empathy and kindness. So what empathy, of course, is an internal state, right? We feel with other people, we try to take on the thoughts of other people, but it's going on internally. Okay, so without something happening, externally, it's just going to sit there within our bodies, right? So we have the perspective of others, we're understanding their pain, but we're not able to sort of act on it until we bring in kindness, right? So this is an external behavior, right? It's something that we do within our environment. So that empathy leads us, that internal feeling state leads us then to doing some type of external behavior. So empathy only becomes meaningful, right, when it leads to kindness. Otherwise, it's just sitting there within your body, you're feeling the pain of somebody else, but it's not meaningful for anything, right, until we actually act upon that empathy and do some sort of pro-social behavior to help with that pain that others might be feeling. I really love this quote that was done by Zaki, I believe you pronounce it as, and they say empathy's most important role is to inspire kindness, our tendency to help each other even at a cost to ourselves. So empathy leading into those pro-social actions of of context, sorry. And so we then are gonna move on here to talk a little bit, sorry that was a bad transition, into why education matters, okay? So let me get that slide up there for you. So this, I think, is really the crux, the really important piece of this whole presentation itself, right? We are educators, you are college students, so the education piece really, really matters here in terms of talking about, from going from empathy to kindness. Now, what education should be doing, right, is strengthening our ability to take the perspective of other people. So it's not just all about concepts and statistics and things that we're teaching you in classes. Of course, those are important, but it's also important for us to show you diverse perspectives of other people and for us to then be able to take on those perspectives as well, right? So it helps us to then do that. Now, what I want to do here is really tie this into my discipline, so to tie this into social psychology by giving you some examples of how we can perspective take. So basically what it does, right, is it teaches us how to see. And what we want to do here is we want to be able to see context, not just behavior. So let me give you an example here, right? So this is something that we call the fundamental attribution error within psychology. It's fundamental because it happens all the time. This is when we're looking at another person's behavior and we're trying to make a judgment about why that person is who they are or why they're doing the things that they're doing. Okay? The attribution error that we do here is when we look at other people, we tend to blame them as people and then ignore the context of the situation in which they're in. Okay? So let's apply this to a real world example. Let's say you're walking along the street, you see an unhoused individual that's on the street, they're in front of you, right? And if you are, unfortunately, to make the fundamental attribution error, which I think a lot of us do, no blame, it's a lot of us do it, it's fundamental, we tend to blame the person, right? Rather than focusing on the context of their situation. So we end up saying things like, oh, this person's lazy. This person doesn't want to work hard, rather than understanding that person lives within a context of their own life. Maybe they have trouble getting a job, right? The economy is bad, they lost their job, maybe they're suffering from a severe mental illness that doesn't allow them to work. And so when we sort of switch our perspective from internal attributions to looking at context, then we can be much more kind to those people, right, in terms of driving whatever action we might be doing there for them. We also, again, in terms of teaching us how to see, we want to see people, not just stereotypes that we have about people, okay? Again, I'm going to grab a drink here. So stereotypes, by the way, are assumptions we make about groups of people, and oftentimes these stereotypes are negative judgments that we make about another group of people. And if they are left unchecked, they can lead into prejudice, right, feeling negative towards those people, and then discrimination, where we're actually acting in a negative way to them as a result of that, right? And so when we're looking at people, we need to understand that we should look at, again, at the individual person, not the stereotype of that group that that person belongs to. So if we look at, for example, maybe an undocumented person that has come into the United States, we might stereotype them, right? We might say, oh, they're looking, they're looking to sort of take advantage of the system, right? They're doing something like that. When in reality, right, the individual themselves, maybe they are just coming to the United States because they're seeking a better opportunity for themselves and their family. So we're seeing that individual perspective rather than this sort of negative stereotype that we have about those individual people. Now, why does this matter, right? It matters because we can have empathy for people, but what we have to have is empathy that is accurate, right? So empathy that really understands the context and the situation that people are in, so that we can then have that informed empathy that leads to kindness that actually helps people, right, in those particular situations. All right, so that again ties into social psychology, something that we talk a lot about within my class. Let's talk a little bit about how then we can practice kindness. So, if we have this ability to see the fundamental attribution error, or the idea that we might judge people based on preconceived notions, how can we start to then practice kindness? Now, I got up this morning and sort of reworked this whole presentation because I thought that I had a bunch of platitudes here, like, oh, be good to people, open the door for people, do a random act of kindness, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that that's what we really are talking about here, right? We're talking about more substantive types of things that we can do in terms of kindness towards individuals. So, one thing I'd like to do is to sort of point out that if we're going to practice kindness towards people, we need to start with perspective, okay? So we need to start with sort of perspective taking. In terms of that, we want to, first of all, pause before judging someone's behavior. So rather than walking down the street, seeing a homeless person and going, I'm not going to help that person because they don't want to help themselves, right? We might want to pause and consider again the context in which that person actually comes out of. Again, considering people's situational factors that influence the action that they're taking, right? So the situation that they're in driving them, rather again than those internal personality traits, can help us also to then move into kind pro-social action. So what I want you to ask yourself here, right, if you're sort of beginning to take a perspective of another person, wanting that to lead into kind action, is what might be happening behind the scenes. So we can look at people and we can sort of see the groups that they're in, right, and we can make judgments about that, and oftentimes we are completely wrong. And so we want to understand, right, that everybody has things that are going on behind the scenes that they might be hiding from you, right? And so to understand what might be happening there, we can then come from a place where we're truly trying to understand them and then do something in terms of, pro-social actions. So here we also might respond with curiosity, right? So respond by asking them about their experiences, so you're able to then perspective take with them, rather again than those assumptions that we might be making about the group of people, or our preconceived notions about that group of people as well. So starting with the perspective, I think, is really important, and that can lead again into some pro-social actions or kindness as a result of that. So practicing kindness, here I want to sort of extend this beyond ourselves, right? So another way that we can do that again is sort of to question some of the things that we're doing. So questioning, for example, the stereotypes when they're arising, right, within our present situation. So that's a really good thing to do, right, to make that question to yourself. Humanize people that are not a part of your circle. Oftentimes it's really easy for us to empathize with people that are similar to us, but people that are different from us, right, we need to sort of make them humans rather than people that belong to this group that we're making assumptions about. We also need to consider power structures as well as context, before forming judgments about people. So again, looking back at the fundamental attribution error, looking back at prejudice and discrimination, we need to consider those things before we form our judgments about people and why they do the things that they do. And we then, of course, are going to let all of those sort of understandings that that have come from that hopefully guide fair, helpful action for those individuals. Because again, without education, that empathy can be really hollow, right? We need to sort of have that education so that we know how to direct that kindness and pro-social actions to other people that are out there. All right, so what do we carry home with us from this particular sort of presentation? So a really important thing for us to understand again is that empathy is what leads us to notice, to understand, and to feel other people's feelings, right? To really step into their shoes and try to understand the perspective that is important within their own life. And we need education because it's going to guide empathy into that thoughtful action. So if we didn't have that education in, again, the fundamental attribution error or into prejudice and discrimination, we are going to have empathy, again, that can be fairly hollow. Or we might not be actually helping the right people. We might be, again, just helping people that are similar to us. So what kindness is, right, that comes out of that is just empathy in motion that's guided by education. Okay, so I wanted to end this particular presentation with a literary quote. I'm so upset that Douglas is not here because during Doug's presentation, he actually pointed to a psychological study talking about how you can increase empathy by being a part of drama classes. And so what I wanted to do was to just give a nod back to Doug and show him that literary works also can be applied to a psychological talk. So I wanted to use this one. This is a quote from one of my favorite books as well as movies, so To Kill a Mockingbird. And this is Atticus talking to his son, and he says, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Until you climb inside of his skin and walk around in it again. So that's what empathy is all about, right? Being able to put ourselves into somebody else's shoes, to understand what it is that they're going through. Again, this is just an internal sort of thing, right? So it needs to have also the education piece where we're teaching you how to perspective take. We're teaching about, all of the institutions, all of the power structures that might get in the way of that. And then that is going to lead to kindness that's been directed by education. So that's why education matters so much in this sort of, line from empathy into kindness.